She's a blind pig.
We will go ahead and get this Norwood City Council meeting called to order. Please rise for a moment of reflection and a pledge of allegiance. Thank you. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen? Here. Mrs. Hoover? Here. Ms. Royce? Here. Mrs. Bowling? Here. Mrs. Winterbauer? Here. Mr. Gerton?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
We have 6 of 7 members present here this evening. Moving on to amendment of the agenda, we do have 2 items. We are removing the Finance Committee report under standing reports of council, and we are adding a communication from the auditor regarding a report on accounting methods. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to amend the agenda as stated. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? Yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the first item for this evening, we have a special presentation by Ohio State Senator Catherine Ingram.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
He was disturbing.
I will be forced to call you out of order.
Thank you so much. I am State Senator Catherine Ingram in the 9th District here in Hamilton County and am truly honored to be here today. Thank you, Mr. Council President, and all of you illustrious members for allowing us to be here. And the purpose that I am here is that we are introducing a bill at the State House. It is Senate Bill number 254. Senator Blessing and I are introducing that bill. It's quite simple, quite to the point. It is to enact Section 5534.512 of the revised code to designate State Route 562 in Hamilton County as the Bridget Kelly Norwood lateral. The interesting thing about this is to be enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Ohio. Section 1 is that the Section 5534.512 of the revised code be enacted to read as follows. In addition to any other name prescribed in the revised code or otherwise, the westbound and eastbound lanes of State Route number 562 between Interstate Route number 75 and Interstate Route number 71 in Hamilton County shall be known as the Bridget Kelly Norwood lateral. The Director of Transportation may erect suitable markage along the highway indicating its name. That's the bill. Straight to the point. Not a whole lot of other things that we need to change in code and different sections. And our ask, and I am going to let him talk, our ask is that we get from you, the City of Norwood, and your council members, an acknowledgement that you agree with the fact that that should be named after Bridget Kelly.
Well, I really don't have a ton to add to that, but no, I agree. You know, I served with Bridget for a number of years in the Ohio House, and, you know, even though I was on the other side of the aisle, we worked very well together over the years, and she was one of those people that just worked well with anybody, really. So Very proud to be on this bill as well. I hope this is something that you guys would agree with and would want to do. So I'm thrilled that my colleague, Senator Catherine Ingram, would have me on this bill. So rather than belabor the point, we'll leave you guys to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, wait. I can't, no, I can't, I'm sorry, that's me. Ask Senator Blessing, I do that on the floor sometimes. It's important for me to recognize that Bridget's family is here also. Martha, come on, y'all, stand up. Bridget's father, Bob, her husband, Steve, her mom, Martha, her brother, Ned, and Heather. I knew I'd get it. Heather and the youngest one, Greg. And Bob's wife, of course, partner, Judy. Okay, friend, Judy. Thank you guys for being here, and the little ones. Oh my God. And Ryan, who of course Bridget loved dearly, spent a lot of time talking about her. And so I'm sorry, you guys, that I didn't do that at first, but thank you so much for being here. And hopefully when we get those signs up, we'll have a big ribbon cutting and do some of those things that'll be so important for us to acknowledge. This isn't going to be a little sub name under there. Transportation is going to rename it so that if you do GPS or something like that, it's going to say the Bridget Kelly Norwood Lateral. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Council, questions, comments?
Of course, I'm going to make a comment. Thank you, Mr. President. When I first heard about this bill, it just makes perfect sense. Ever since I first met Bridget, she is all about building bridges, building alliances. The fact that this is coming from two, opposite sides, and the fact that this would span from the east side to the west side, which is, as we know, the biggest divide, the biggest battle. And so, as a daughter of, as Bridget being a daughter of Norwood and always keeping Norwood front and center in her world. It's a really beautiful recognition, and thank you so much for championing that for us and for her.
Mr. Gurdon.
Mr. President, I volunteer if there's somebody else that would want to help draft the letter that we could approve to send to the state.
Yeah, and I believe that will be in the form of a resolution, and we'll work with the law department to have that drafted for the Senator Ingram. The next council meeting will work.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Thank you all. Moving on to the next item is a public hearing. And the City of Norwood will hold a public hearing on May 28th, 2024 at 7:30 p.m. at the second floor council chambers located at 4645 Montgomery Road, Norwood, Ohio, to consider text changes associated with a proposed zoning ordinance amendment. A brief summary of this proposed amendment includes changes to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, prohibiting the location and operation of food trucks from private property and/or individual lots, and other related changes. A complete copy of the entire amendment may be obtained and viewed. There was a website provided, as well as at the Norwood Building Department, room 101 of City Hall, Monday through Friday, between 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Anyone wishing to attend the hearing is welcome to speak. If you require additional information or special accommodations to attend, please call beforehand 513-458-4510. If the Planning Commission endorses this proposed zoning ordinance text amendment, it will then be sent to Norwood City Council for a public hearing and consideration. I will go ahead and declare this public hearing opened. Anyone to speak in favor of the proposed changes, please step forward. Anyone?
Okay. See you.
Hi, my name is Brianna Moreno Martinez. I'm speaking for my mom 'cause she doesn't speak English, but she owns a taco bus that's right down the street. So she started working there for somebody else not too long ago. She was working there for, well, actually a long time ago, but she was working there for almost 2 years as an employee. And then they were gonna move out and move the location and stuff, so she was gonna end up being jobless. And I mean, it's 5 siblings, and it's my parents, and obviously my dad has a job, but with like economy nowadays, I mean, it's good to have another source of income. But she decided to buy the taco bus, rename it, rebrand it, and everything. And so now it's a family-owned and ran business. She works every day except on Sundays from 10 to 7. She opens up, she sells tacos, burritos, like a whole bunch of Mexican food, and everything is made on site and prepared homemade for everybody around us. And if anything were to happen to like just the taco bus in general, then I mean, she would be jobless because it's not easy to find a plaza or easy to find like a new place to locate and start selling food because there is so many of us. So like it'd be hard to find, and there'd be just so many. And apart from that, like it's hard, like especially as like a Hispanic and Latino community, it's hard to like start from nothing and basically go up. So this taco bus has expanded her to like so much more opportunities because she started working for somebody and now she's a business owner. And I guess like she sets an example for myself and the rest of my siblings, especially from a young age, because we all go and help out when we can. And I mean, it's not easy, but it's good and it's nice.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against the proposed changes?
Yes, I'm speaking against it. Okay. My name's Corey. I own a barbecue food trailer. I'm a veteran also. And the reason I'm up here, first of all, I want to say I enjoy the people of Norwood. I thank them for their support. While people come to get food from the food trucks, it actually brings business to the city of Norwood. While people are eating, maybe at the BP gas station, they'll go get gas. They'll get things on the inside. Someone comes to see me in Norwood. While they're there, they may go get groceries from Kroger's or one of the many stores that are there. I think it's a good opportunity. I think it's really good for the city with the food trucks being there. It also brings people to the city that otherwise wouldn't come. They're coming to get their food. Another example, if you use Shell gas for your vehicle, you drive past every gas station until you get to the Shell gas station to get the gas that you want. In the same sense, the same thing applies for food. Me, I love Chinese food, for example. I'll drive past every restaurant to get the food that I want. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak against the matter?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Edgar Banderas, and I'm a hometown kid. Grew up in Norwood, went to Norwood High School, played sports here. The reason I'm here tonight is because me, my brother, our family, the whole Banderas family here grew up. And I think it's very important to us keeping our business open. The reason is why, because it's the backbone of our family. Not only that, but we own the Mexican Village and also the ice cream shop that we had cleaned up, the whole corner, you know. I feel like a lot of people has come together, come around. Before then, it was a dealership that nobody even paid attention to. Now it's the center of Norwood, where you can come get ice cream, you can come get food. But I speak for everybody that here that has a food truck, food trailer, because this is everything they work for all their lives. But I feel like it's unfair, to come in and just take everything away from everybody. So yeah, I just feel like it's really, I think for a lot of people it's important, to be able to, go and say, this is my business. And we provide in Norwood with a lot of stuff, clean up the streets, But I just feel like Norwood has bigger issues to worry about the food truck situation, but that's just my thoughts. But this is why we have you guys to take care of that, and we we'd love to keep them here. So, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else to speak against the proposed changes?
Here. Waiting for you started.
All right, we're good.
There you go. Good evening. My name is James Thomas. I've lived in Norwood for about 10 years. Grew up in a neighborhood next door, Madisonville. And this always hasn't been the brightest shining community when you look in the past. I think the optics of this are bad. They're really bad. Because there are no white-owned food trucks in Norwood. This is the Mexican community and the black community. And that's who's going to be affected by this decision. So this being my first council meeting I went to, I wanted to go and look on the website and look a little bit at what was there. And I stumbled upon something that was very interesting to me. 101 years ago, there was a black family that moved into Norwood. 101 years ago. Where Marsh Park is now. And that family was displaced. Norwood used eminent domain to force them out. Because at the time, they thought that black people were invading the city. That was the verbiage. It wasn't some made-up thing. That was the mentality of the time. That was 101 years ago. And now we have an ordinance in front of us that only affects black and Mexican business owners. One of them who has brought athletes to Norwood, who has brought television stations to Norwood to talk positive about Norwood. We don't need negative publicity for this city that is on the rise. We need more positive. We've got Paycor left. We've got the news of negativity can end with this group and saying, hey, we're going to forget about this. We're going to support you. We're going to see what we can do to communicate with the members of the community and see their concerns that they have. Can we put it in a better place to where they want brick and mortar? So what can we do to take these business owners and get them out of a food truck and get them in a brick and mortar? What do we have to do to make Norwood a little bit better? What pieces do we have to put together? AJ's Cheesesteaks was at Taste Cincinnati. Nobody else was, not from Norwood. There's nobody else. That's a representative for this city. Over the 5 years that I've known Ty, I've seen him take homeless people and help them, get them off the street. I've seen him have somebody come up that has no money. Hey, here you go. Here's a sandwich, man. What can I do to help you? We need more members of the community like that, not to push them out. That's the bottom line of this. That's what you're doing here, is you're pushing positive, proactive members of the community out of the community. And sure, City of Cincinnati, Deer Park, they'll take him. In a heartbeat, they'll take him. And they'll celebrate him, and they'll put him forward. Why can't Norwood? Why can't we step up as a community, embrace these business owners that want to be here, that aren't leaving and saying, well, you're not giving me any more money, you're not giving me any more breaks, whether the agreement or not, because I had to talk with James about it. Come in. Let's see what we can do for you. Let's see how we can get the community members that don't want you here, and the community members that do want you here, work together and find a solution. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it's my turn now. Hi, my name is Ty. Me and my wife Laura, we own AJ's Cheesesteaks. We've lived in Norwood for probably going on 11 years now. Moved up here from Detroit and Gary, Indiana, which were cities that are, were in decline and drugs and gangs and it's just overall bad. And so we moved to a state that we thought that would give us the best opportunity to raise our children, to be productive members of society. And so we started this business 5 years ago with a small trailer. And since then, I think we've grown the business. But there's been a lot of talk about that we're breaking the law. There's been a lot of talk of saying that we're not giving brick and mortars fair fair advantages. There's been a lot of talk of food trucks not moving 40 days after the 40 days lost based on the RRC. There's been a lot of talk about how the food trucks are nasty and they're dirty. There's been just a lot of malarkey about the particular food trucks. I feel like Norwood has not offered not one iota of support when it comes to small businesses, in particular minority businesses. So all of these trucks, all of these businesses up here are representatives of this community. Now, one time has Norwood ever came. So I just want to say that our food trucks, we work very hard in this community. We've made the BP safe for people. That was a place where prostitution was rampant, drugs was rampant, homelessness was rampant. People that were getting out of jails and prison would come down there. It was said that we don't give back to our community, where I have receipts where we've given money to the police department. I have receipts where we've given money to schools. I have receipts where we have brought people and given money to people that put them in rehabilitation centers. And so if we're not providing a service to the community, then who is? If we're not providing a service to the community by helping the less fortunate, people that don't have the money to get into a good home or to get a job. One of the things that we do is that we hire from the community first. I put a Facebook page out that says that we're looking for people to hire, not just there, but on my other location inside TQL Stadium. And we want to hire residents from Norwood first. And we were willing to pay them up to $20 an hour. Nobody responded. Nobody. When I ask for resolutions when it comes to what can be done about the food trucks in particular, there hasn't been any resolution that has been put on the books, right? I don't think Norwood owns any of the buildings themselves, but we're being pressed to go inside these brick and mortar things. And one, Norwood hasn't offered any kind of grants or competitive financing to help. So I think it's unfair. I think it's unfair. I think it's directed at not just individuals, but not just businesses, but individuals. I think that it's not true. It's not honest. There's a person that does not agree with having these food trucks in this particular communities. In particular, people who don't want to come to Norwood, they come. I personally know some of the celebrities that have come here. I've personally been recommended to feed the Packers organization by Jeff Ruby. I personally know some of the biggest athletes and celebrities that come down to that bus that would vouch for us. We're known for being in that particular location. We're known not just by the people in Norwood, but the people that are actually watching now. I know that there are media watching right now because of us. I know that there are celebrities watching right now, right at this very moment because of us. I know that there are athletes who care about what we're doing and how we do and what we do in our community that are watching and care about this particular issue. And so I guess I have the question is, what is the issue? Because we were told that food trucks don't move. Well, every time we move, we call the city and we tell the city that we're actually moving. And so I just want to ask this council, and I want to ask the mayor, and I want to ask the law director, what is the issues with food trucks? Why is this being an issue? Because if you're forcing us to go into a brick and mortar, some of these people don't have $500,000 or $600,000 to put into a brick and mortar. Some of these people don't have the money to fix some of the dilapidated buildings that has been sitting for years on Montgomery Road. Some of these people don't have the money to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into a roofing and ANSO system. Some of these people don't have that money. They don't have the money to hire lawyers and accountants. They don't have the money to do that. They have the money to take care of their families and represent their community. So I have to ask, what is the main issue with the food trucks that have provided a great service and that's helped clean up the community? I know that's my time. I thank you. I appreciate being here. I appreciate everybody that's said that they were going to watch, and I appreciate the media for supporting us. And this is just not a fight that we're going to give up on.
Anyone else to speak against the proposed changes?
No, then go ahead.
I sent you folks a letter earlier. Tonight, I'd like to talk about the food truck ordinance and the restrictions which are pending council's approval. I'm speaking to council as these concerns cover economic development, public health, public spaces, and infrastructure. Currently, gas-powered generators are required for most food trucks at the sidewalk. Our participatory mapping study showed that the barbecue truck parked on Montgomery Road at Surrey Square at that time produced a measurable uptick in PM 2.5 particulate matter, and it was loud. PM 2.5 is the smallest and most dangerous particle as it can penetrate the blood-brain barrier and soft tissue such as the heart. Generators are smelly, loud, and contribute to air pollution. They are equal to a truck idling, and most can run continuously for at least 8 hours. Note there are idling bans in other cities and school systems. Cincinnati Public Schools, for one, implemented an idling ban when Mary Ronan was superintendent. When the mammogram van first started visiting the Norwood Health Department, then Commissioner Donna Lake saw the need to provide external power for it to eliminate idling and exposure to visitors. Our city should allow clean power to the food trucks at commercial locations, even providing power at city-owned locations where the trucks are likely, and add vitality to events. For example, at Doral Field, the Valley Church hosts its summer event and typically has a food truck at Linden and Kenilworth giving away meals. The location is surrounded by residential homes, so a power source would be welcomed by those residents. The tenure of a food truck is a different concern, and rotation of the trucks can be addressed. As a landlord myself, I believe that a property owner in a commercial location should be able to rent space to food trucks and provide power for a better experience for all customers. Food vendors provide variety and niche foods which can't be viable full-time. Speaking to his, and add a measure of financial security for the owner-landlord. While I do understand concerns about competition with brick-and-mortar food businesses, they offer other amenities, or should, like seating. The commercial spaces at Surrey Square are small, offer minimal seating. They focus on carryout, with no outdoor seating and no green containers, let alone green islands similar to Rookwood. Perhaps we should raise the bar for brick and mortar, not punish food trucks. I'm still wondering why we do not have or allow outdoor seating at Surrey Square and move the fire lane back. Recently, I witnessed a car and a bus being worked on in the fire lane at Surrey. Perhaps the restaurants there have other problems, the food trucks not being one of them. We are now allowing car repair, but not seating for customers of the food businesses. Including, I am pro clean power for food truck vendors, pending neighbor approval and time slots. I support seeking funding for that infrastructure similar to the charging stations. I thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just add, I thought this whole conversation started with implementing a power pole at the BP. But I might be wrong, and that's, somebody can speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nyoka Cope. I've lived in Norwood almost my whole life. I don't have an issue with the food trucks. I eat at them, and if I don't want to eat at them, I don't. And I've went around a lot of them. I don't see any issues with trash all over. And I have with other restaurants that you go in and sit. I don't see a problem, and I don't see why Norwood thinks there's a problem. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm Michelle Thomas, and I have anxiety, so sorry. I think this food truck is a bad idea thing because they bring people in to our community. And while they're here for their favorite taco ice cream or their favorite cheesesteak, which is better than Penn Station, according to almost everybody, they're also exposure to the stores around us or our parks, you know. I personally know Ty has been on the news a lot, not just one station, but all of them. And he always promotes Norwood. He says where else he is or where else he'll be, but he always promotes Norwood first. And I think that more people should put Norwood first instead of, like somebody else said earlier, we got more problems in Norwood than food trucks. And if it's on a private property and I get into a fender bender and the Norwood police can't come and help me, then what's it to Norwood where the food trucks are? You know, they're paying what they need to pay. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They're obeying the laws. They're good people. They do good things for the community. And I think pushing them out is wrong, and I think it is bad. So I hope you guys don't push them out. People come very far to see some of these people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, here we go again. This is absolutely ridiculous. You all know that I wouldn't be standing here as upset as I am if we were doing the things that we should be doing. We've come a long way as a community. And I don't know, maybe there is someone out there on the battlefield as much as I am. I know Ty does a lot of great work, but a lot of blood, sweat, and tears has gone into helping this community be rid of the old protocols that no one in this room can deny. But I'm embarrassed tonight. There's absolutely no way in God's land that any one of you should be sitting here to talk about the livelihood of people that if you just look at it, we're talking about minorities. We're talking about minorities' lifestyles. We're talking about an opportunity to come to the table. And all I'm saying tonight is, let's stop the nonsense. Let's stop the protocols of the old. If we had an issue with the food trucks, where was the meeting with the food truck owners privately to make sure that each and every one of them had a crystal clear understanding, not with a letter that I also read, that if I were a food truck, I'd have to get more clarity. I'd have to get more understanding. So before you come public, so the whole world can see, we have more issues again with minority people. All I'm saying is call a private meeting and say, listen, this is what the state is saying. Listen, this is what the county is challenging us with. And we want to work with you. We want to make this happen. But when we wait to come to a public hearing like this, and you're only talking about minorities, we've marched these streets. We've brought judges, doctors, lawyers who walked away and said, Bishop, oh my God, this is actually Norwood, Ohio. We're doing it. And I'm saying, yes, we are. Before I came here tonight, I was in a clergy meeting. And to be very honest with you, I can't wait to go back to that group. I can't wait to go back and say, we're not just interested in the challenges that we need to make in the state, but now we need to take a look at this. Not time up yet. We need to take a look at this. Why isn't DEI all over this, fussing and complaining and saying, wait a minute. I have residents that are saying, why? What's going on? Answer the call to the people you serve, not to the administration. And if I misspoken on the administration, please forgive me. But whatever the powers to be are, to make us be so foolish and so irresponsible. And no one here now can say that a person that looks like me would not personally think this is a personal effort to take out or minimize people like me. And I think each and every one of you know what I think about that. And over my dead body, we're not going backwards. Change this now. Don't make any vote till you talk with these people and hear their hearts. And once you've done that, as a people, let's come together intelligently so that we all know what the real issues are. Not come to a public meeting and business owners have to ask, what's the real problem, city of Norwood? I can tell you what the problem is. This looks like old head Norwood, and it ain't gonna fly. God bless you, and I pray you'll do the right thing. And if not, we'll help you. God bless you.
Anyone else to speak against the proposed changes? Anyone else to speak against the proposed changes? Seeing there are none, I will go ahead and declare this public hearing closed. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, we have requests to address council, and there is one. I could have just let you stand up there. I'm kidding. Bishop Sonny James.
All right, to God be the glory. First of all, you know, the Bible does say, let's give credit to whom credit is due. I recently went to the Victory Memorial Park celebration the other day. And I have to say to all of our residents, that was a very beautiful event. It had city folks there. Our mayor was there. Our mayor's wife was there. And it had folks there that had recently come in these chambers with some very serious concerns over the park. But I have to admit, I was very, very proud to be in the midst. And guys, that's what Norwood is about. I think the mayor and I can tell some stories about how, you know, things happen, relationships sever, misunderstandings happen. But at the end of the day, to be proud to see one another, be proud to stand together, father to father, wife to wife, child to child, grandchild to grandchild. Guys, we've come a long, long way in this community. We still have some hills to climb. Tonight, I came here to the city building again to find that the city building was locked yet again. This isn't my first, second, or third, or fourth time making this challenge. What it goes to show is that we challenge a lot of things and a lot of people. But when we can't get a door open to a public meeting over and over and over again, but yet I don't see anyone jumping up and down, screaming and shouting, saying, Norcom, how incompetent can we be? We invite the residents to come to this meeting, and we want them to come to this meeting. Faux, pro, or con, we want them in this room. But how can we have people feel like they're wanted and they're welcomed if we can't even get a door open? And that same incompetence, in my opinion, would even dare to stand up against other protocols, not just mentioning the food trucks. Well, you can't even get a door open. Then how competent are we to challenge things? We have a DEI now. We should be celebrating every culture. It should be a priority that we continue to move forward in the ways that we have. I'm meeting with a rather large group of clergy. And don't worry, if some of you go behind my back and say, hey, do you know Bishop Sonny? Don't be surprised if they say no. Because they already know. We're not going to let anything cut our head off. But I'm not bringing people for what's wrong with Norwood. I'm bringing people, Law Director, I have no idea if there's something that I'm saying that's causing you to shake your head. But with all due respect, when I bring people here, I'm bringing them here to brag and to show off all of the things that we've accomplished together. And it hasn't been easy. I'm begging you, probably for the last time I take a breath on this earth, I'm begging you for the last time, just respect each other. Just love each other. Show enough care so that when people do show up, at least they feel their voices are heard, not some status quo. Finally, I'm so excited that my youngest son, Lemuel, is back from the Middle East. And I thank each and every one of you watching, sitting here listening, that have prayed for my son, prayed for my family. I thank the mayor who have shared positive sentiments, and that meant a lot to just even acknowledge. Those are the small things, guys, that we can keep doing to make Norwood into what our children envision it to be. Let's get this together, guys, so we're not embarrassed. God bless you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to reports of standing committees of council. We have the Law, Ordinance, Human Resources, and Compliance Committee from May 21st.
To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Law, Ordinance, Human Resource, and Compliance, to whom was referred Chapter 1759 of the City Code, titled Trees, Weeds, and Grass, beg leave to submit the following report. The committee discussed possible changes to the code section, specifically regarding noxious weeds and grass violations. Respectfully submitted, Ms. Alexis Royce, Mrs. Sam Bowling, Mr. Jeff Girton, and Mrs. Susan Hoover.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Hey, I move to accept the report as read.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to accept the committee report. Is there a second? Mrs. Franzen.
A second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to introductory readings of ordinances. First item, ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code relating to mobile food trucks to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation and by prohibiting mobile food trucks from locating and operating their business on private property and individual lots and other related changes. What's your pleasure? Mrs. Winterbauer.
I make a motion to have the first reading.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to have the first reading. Is there a second? Mrs. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I don't know if we want to discuss before or after the vote, but I have a lot of questions with this. and was hoping we could have further dialogue about it. So I guess my question, Mr. President, when would be the appropriate time for us to do that? Now?
We can do it now.
Okay. Who here could give us the best history about where this came from?
Mayor Schneider?
I can help with this. Maybe I'll stand up and make it fire and brimstone. Because as we listen to things being said, right away I thought, something's wrong here. There should have been a deal struck with everybody there. There should have been people called into rooms and we should have shook hands and said, let's find a solution. But really, that's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work this way. There's a public hearing. There's actually a first reading of the ordinance, which you are doing right now, the first reading. That's at one council meeting. Then there's a second reading. 2 weeks later, there's a second reading. And within that time frame, community members, and I'll get to your question.
Thank you, sir.
But within that time frame of between the first reading and the second reading, even between the time frame of it going on the agenda, that's when there's a public discourse. And it's not where everybody has to get up and argue. It's where everybody has a discussion. And people come, just like we saw today. Community members come and they speak and they say, hey, I'm a little anxious about being up here, but this is my voice. And they talk and we listen. And that's the process. That's the fair process that's put out there. Has nothing to do with whether you're black, white, red, doesn't matter. Because there's a discussion that takes place. And we're having one reading today, right? That's what the vote was, to have one reading. 2 weeks later, there's another council meeting, and there's another reading. And then there's even a third reading, which is 2 weeks after that. And within that time frame, the members of the community who own the restaurants, who own these either the restaurants or the mobile food trucks, discuss it. And they talk to their council members, and council members have discussions with other community members. That's how it's supposed to work. That's why this public hearing is put out there. And that's why you have 3 readings of an ordinance. And that's how government works. And it's great because you have the chance to speak to your elected officials and you don't have to yell and shout at them. You don't have to tell them. You don't have to threaten them at all because they listen. And when they listen, you get positive results for the greater good of the whole community. So now to get back to your original question of how this got on here, this was brought to the Planning Commission by community members. There were community members that talked to the administration, either talked to me or talked to the safety service director or other people and said, what are we doing about this? They shouldn't be in place the whole time. There's health department regulations. There's state regulations on what they should or shouldn't be doing. The city needs to enforce the rules, whether that's through the health department or the building department. So we are, and when I say we are, the mayor's office is required to enforce the rules that are put in place. You guys pass ordinances. And when you pass an ordinance, you're saying this is how it should be done. And you pass ordinances on parking restrictions, on obnoxious weeds and all this. But somebody has to go out and enforce those things. And through the mayor's office, it goes through the police department, or through the health department, or through the building department, we enforce the rules. So if the rule is wrong, it might come back to you guys. The Planning Commission is put in place to plan for the future of the city of Norwood. Here's things that are going on. Let's put plans in place. Are we going to look at EV charging? Have we already discussed that? Yeah. As things change, the Planning Commission is the sanctioned body that it comes to. And then the sanctioned body of the Planning Commission says, hey, let's get this in front of the representatives of the community, the elected representatives. It comes to you guys. And that's how it works. It doesn't have to be an argument. It's a discussion. And we move in a positive way on a path to make the right decision. And that's really what it all comes down to. Today was just a public hearing and a first reading. For 2 weeks, we'll see more conversation about this. I'm sure there'll be discussion on idling motors. And, are there always these generators that are sitting there, or are they plug in at times? Do they even need those? What are they? So there'll be discussion about that, and that's how it's supposed to work. So I think we're on the right path to finding a solution. I heard a couple of suggestions. That's great. I'm sure you'll hear a couple of suggestions. We bring them back to the table. We sort of mix it all together in the next, 2-3 weeks, and we come up with a solution that works for everybody. But it's a process that's there, and there's a path that we go down that is dictated to make sure it's clear and transparent. There's no we don't go behind the scenes and say, hey man, people are complaining about this. Maybe if you did this or that, let's fix it. That's not how it works. What it works is, just like we're doing right now, you come up to the microphone, you talk to your elected officials, you call them on the phone, you send them an email, there's a discourse back and forth, and you find a good solution. So, Susan, Ms. Hoover, I know that you asked that question, maybe you didn't want as much as was there, but being a member of the Planning Commission, that's what we do. We're trying to plan for the future, what's important to the community.
So thank you, sir. I appreciate and I agree that there is a process, and that while emotions are obviously elevated, I don't think that they need to be at this time.
Not at all.
I'm curious about a resident said that this started with the power source at the BP. Can we have can you explain to me as a non-food truck owner, what are the issues? I know some have plug-in, some have propane. I don't know if that's even right. I have not heard anyone complain about the quality of our food truck food. I'm a fan. When I did my police ride-along, that's where we went. They all ate there. So I'm not hearing that there's any concern about the quality of the food. And I would also say I feel like they do brighten the spots that they're in, that there isn't litter, there isn't the previous car lot that's now the food truck and the Mexican ice cream place, and you've got to go there. It's just so good. That makes that corner look better. So my question is, what are the challenges that we have to make it more manageable, I guess, is my question.
Mayor Schneider?
So you're exactly right. I think that it did start with what Dana, Ms. Bowles said, was there was a discussion about putting in a 480 connector for the truck that sits at the BP station. At that point, it did come to the light of day, and the Planning Commission started saying, well, if they're doing that, doesn't that put them in a permanent position? And I'm sure there's discussion on whether that makes it a permanent. Instead of a mobile food truck, it's just a restaurant that's sitting there. And then what requirements are required from that point on? And then during the discussion there was, well, okay, if you've got 5 propane tanks sitting there because some of them use propane to cook their whatever they're cooking, is that a fire concern? Is there a concern for that in the neighborhood? So it's definitely progressed. I mean, are the rules more lax because they are considered a mobile food truck? Does the health department, whether that's the county health department or the city's health department, what are the regulations in the city of Norwood for them? Because if they get a permit in Hamilton County, they can go all over Hamilton County, and do they actually look at them as rigorously for health department violations? Are there less regulations for mobile food trucks compared to a brick and mortar restaurant? Ventilation problems or potential ventilation problems, if they're setting up, the one that's on Sherman is set up pretty much right next to a home or the one, so that could that be ventilation problems? I know that we have the same problem in our community. People say they smell Chipotle in their neighborhood, right in their front door. So there's differences like that. Unfair to business was something that came up to brick and mortar businesses because, and I think this had to do with some discussion when the barbecue place was, well, it's actually back in the exact same place, but Dickey's was opening up right in the strip there, and Dickey's is gone now. I mean, the mobile food business maybe ran them out of business, or maybe they just weren't that good. But that's something, that's something that happens. So those are parts of it. ADA compliance. There's rules and regulations that are in place that they're saying we need to look at. So I think there's a lot to be discussed here. And this having the public hearing opens it up for a lot of
of different discussion on whether it's good and bad and what we should be doing.
Are we allowed to say anything else? Are we allowed to say anything else?
You are not.
Because everything that I'm hearing that's coming out of this man's mouth is not true. I can tell you that for an absolute fact. I do this for a living.
okay.
I understand everything that's going on up in here.
Ty, we got you.
Everything.
We got it.
And what he's saying is not true. I can tell you that for absolute facts.
It's okay.
Do I get to finish?
Yes.
So these are just discussions that people have had with me and conversations that I've had with different people. Now, whether it's factual or not factual that I had those conversations or people talk to me about that, I can guarantee you 100% it's factual. I'm not making any of this stuff up. These are discussions. So, and can we find a solution to them? I think we can. Maybe we can't. Depends on how it proceeds from here.
Mrs. Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Thank you, Mayor Schneider, for giving your perspective, and thank you all for coming and to the public hearing. As the mayor said, just for those of you who this may be your first council meeting, don't really pay attention to this. Like you said, the way this works, when the planning commission comes to us with a proposed change, we are required by law to set a public hearing, as we've done here with they have to give 30 days notice. So right now, when we have done this, where we are having the first reading, we have to make a motion like that so that we can discuss this. So the public hearing time was your time, so we couldn't really interact with you. And now we can kind of talk amongst ourselves based on what we've heard. I just wanted to let people know how this works, because that's, I think, something important to know. And obviously, after the meeting and in the coming weeks, we can continue to talk to you outside of council chambers as well, in person and via email. So just letting you know about that. That's kind of the processing. I think there's kind of two things here with trying to clarify the process and also talk about the actual text of this proposed change. So for me, I kind of have pretty serious reservations about this. I don't feel that this is such a pressing concern that we need to make these drastic changes. I am glad that we are just having the first reading. We can keep talking about this. In order for this to even go into effect, we'd have to have 2 more readings at 2 separate other council meetings, and then we would have to pass it. We can choose to pass it or not pass it after that 3rd reading. So for me, I feel like I need to talk more to the administration about this. If I had to make a vote today, I'd probably vote no, but I want to make sure that I keep talking to everyone here, all the interested parties. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Garten.
Mr. President, according to paragraphs 3, 4, 5, and 7, there are major issues with that has caused this problem that has the goal of city planning to put this forward. I'd like to request from the building department all complaints throughout the history of Norwood about food trucks on private land from the landlords who are complaining about food trucks on their land.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
Thank you. I appreciate that there are folks who have concerns about food trucks, and the only concern that I've been spoken to about regarding food trucks is food trucks that behave as permanent businesses, and I understand those concerns. I also think that the writing of this ordinance is really restrictive and doesn't really offer any solutions. I think that we as a council have the burden on us to not just hand out restrictions, and we should be operating in the business of solutions. This mentions the Montgomery Road redevelopment plan as maybe a potential future thing that could offer a solution, but what's that doing for our business owners right now? What solution is that giving them today? There are valid concerns about a food truck being within a certain distance of a brick and mortar restaurant, and I think we could take a page out of the city of Cincinnati's book. They were running into that particularly in downtown near Fausto, and so they just put an ordinance in place that restricted a distance, that you couldn't have a food truck parked within X amount of feet of a business unless it was for a private event or a special event. I think there are ways we could go about this that are much less restrictive than this. food trucks are valuable small businesses in Norwood that help sustain our business corridor and that do bring traffic into the city. And I think that just doing a blanket, you can't be here without a single day permit is not really viable, in my opinion. And is not supportive of the business owners, many of whom live in Norwood and choose to have their businesses in Norwood. I have a ton of concerns about this ordinance and its current, the way it's currently written. Yeah, I have a lot of questions that I'm going to be looking into in the next couple weeks. And I would love to speak to any business owners who either have concerns about this or who are in support of it. But from my current perspective, I don't have a ton of support to offer to this right now.
Mr. Gert.
Were you finished?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. President, I have questions for the rest of council. There's wording in this ordinance that I find troubling. If you look in your council packet and you scroll down, it simply states what the state says is a mobile food truck. And it states that it's an apparatus that routinely changes or can change. So it doesn't have to change, it just says that it can change. The first paragraph of this ordinance, proposed ordinance, I think muddies the definition of what the state has said, and it adds to it and creates more confusion. In paragraph 4, we're calling we're calling a Norwood football player who is now a small business owner a transient vendor. I have a problem with calling our homegrown people transient vendors. Paragraph 5, if you vote for this, you council people are saying you have determined that it is necessary to update the codified ordinances this way. And I find that to be a fraudulent statement since none of us at these two tables had anything to do with this ordinance coming before us. So there's problematic wording that you're asked to vote on. Secondly, or not secondly, lastly maybe, paragraph 7 is concerned with fair and equitable, and it wants to level the playing field. And I find that to be troubling because I'm not for sure which businesses myself as council is supposed to give privileges to. And so I'd like to ask Mr. President, could you please ask the law director what businesses is city council allowed to punish and to give privileges to?
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will say that most of the laws and regulations that govern business in any way, whether it's zoning or health or, pick one, financial products, whatever it is, benefits some businesses more than others. There are winners and losers in any legislative, any way to regulate anything. And so to a certain extent, from a political science, from a public choice perspective, everything council does is about winners and losers. So I'm going to object to the tone of the question because the idea that we're leveling the playing field, that's the idea. So that's the idea of a lot of laws and regulations. They're like, well, this group or this organization or this kind of business has an unfair advantage, or their externalities are damaging the community in some way, and so we are going to regulate them in a way to make others either more able to compete with them or to offset some of the harms that come from whatever the business is. If council passes this and they're saying that the best use of land, the way we want land to be used in the city of Norwood, is that food trucks should not be on private property for extended periods of time. That's what this is really about.
Mr. Gert.
I just want to follow up with some things that Mr. Moore just said. First of all, the health department code requires that the vehicle or whatever it is, the unit moves every 40 days. That is a health department requirement. That has nothing to do with any ordinance that we do or do not pass. So that is on the books, that is already there. I just want to make sure that's clear. So with what Mr. Moore just said, my question for the rest of council is, are you guys ready to vote tonight to decide winners and losers?
Mrs. Franzen?
I'm not, and I'm glad we're not. And so for me, I don't feel that there's a lot of parts of this ordinance that I find confusing or troubling or I don't agree with, but the one thing that really stuck out to me as something that I thought was strange is this idea that these food trucks are competing directly with brick and mortar restaurants. I really don't think that's the case. We have food trucks everywhere in Cincinnati, in Wyoming, Silverton, every municipality, large and small, and yet we still have plenty of restaurants. I think the fact is that restaurants are a hard business to get into. Whether there's food trucks or not, there's a high rate of failure. And I think that one thing that food trucks help people who are just getting into the business, who don't have the capital to acquire a brick and mortar space, is that it's a much smaller buy-in and it allows them to be a lot more flexible and therefore kind of build more capital. I don't think that food trucks are necessarily, every food truck is going to want to become a brick and mortar thing. Some may, that's great, or some may just want to continue to be a food truck. That's great too. For me, as a council member, I don't think it's our place to say that we need to favor brick and mortar restaurants over food trucks. I don't think they're both good. They both provide different services and different ways to get food and bring people into our community. So, yeah, for me, that really is just kind of a non-starter for me with that line of thinking.
Mrs. Hoover?
Thank you, sir. The only other comment I think I want to make at this point is just one of the whereases is perceived public nuisance and overuse, the concern about overuse of commercial lots. And for me, those don't seem measurable. I've not seen any overuse of commercial lots with our food trucks. And perceived public nuisance, that also makes me very uncomfortable. So I would say that at this point, the way this is written, yeah, I have many, many questions. Before, yeah.
Mr. Garten?
Just wanted to clarify something. Corey's barbecue truck was run out of Surrey Square because a private landlord talked about the private contract that they had. Mm-hmm. The private business world figured out that problem. There was somebody, Dickie's, paying tens of thousands of dollars in rent, and there was somebody paying hundreds of dollars in rent. And because of contracts, Dickie was able to talk to its private landlord and solve that problem. We have no business between Surrey Square's Berksmoor property owners. We have no business to get in their business between Corey and Dickie's, who is gone now. I have a huge problem with government meddling with private business.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yep, one last comment, and then again, we are just doing the first reading. This does not indicate that we are passing or not passing this, just again, for everyone watching, because I know, I think it's important that we have 3 readings so that we can have this discussion. I think this is an important discussion to have, even if we end up really changing this or not passing it at all. But yeah, ultimately, for me, if a private entity wants to have a food truck on their property, awesome. If a food truck parks on someone's private property and they don't want them there, yeah, they shouldn't be there. That's ultimately between 2 private people. For me, I think that this is too much of an overreach of our power for this issue that doesn't seem to be a super pressing issue. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mrs. Winterbauer?
Thank you, Mr. President. This came up, I think, 2022, early 2022, when I was chair of Economic Committee. So we've been looking at it for a while, and Planning Commission's been working on it for a long time. Mr. Skelly has done a lot of research, just kind of comparing what other cities do. and really trying to consider everything with it. I mean, Norwood's original ordinance, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, but basically it just said in the central business district on private lots, you couldn't sell anything, mainly to help prevent peddling. And that's where it was. So everyone's been doing a lot of work to try and incorporate food trucks. What's the best vision for Norwood? Personally, I'm not really sure why we would not. I mean, I can see in the future, like, hey, this property might X, Y, Z. And if we have 4 food trucks there, I don't know. But I think looking forward, really having a plan and being supportive of small businesses. If the city's like, hey, we don't want you here, but this is our plan to help you be successful and relocate. I know in Economic Committee, we've been talking about white boxing. So working on some of those properties, getting some grant money for those landlords so we can fix it up. So maybe a small business could come in there a lot more affordable. There's a lot to this. And I think we're at that point that plans can start to materialize. I don't want to vote on anything saying, nope, sorry, you can't be here. That's not being supportive of small businesses, which I think Norwood is that. So what I would love to see as the conversation continues, and I love, Emily, keep reiterating, just because we vote yes to have the first reading does not mean that's our vote to pass it or not. But it helps to continue that conversation. Again, I've been trying to work on this since 2022, asking for input. Like anyone that is interested, has ideas, has solutions, come to the table. Let's sit down, let's figure it out. Maybe the city doesn't have the capacity to make this master plan for a pilot program and where food trucks would be best in this, which would be great to see if anyone's been to Portland or anywhere else that has food truck parks. It's great, but a lot goes into that. A lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of planning. So this might be a good start to that conversation, but it's been going on for a while. The city's been really trying to work on it and see what's best for everybody. But I think this is the point too, where hopefully we can get more input and start really building some solutions for that plan to move forward for everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Royce.
I'm just going to say I'm also not inclined to vote yes on this, especially, it shuts down. I understand why emotions are high. This is people's livelihoods. This is their businesses. And I understand why people would be so upset this is in front of us. But I think it is worth mentioning no one on this council, this is from the Planning Commission. We didn't sit here and decide to type, this group of people did not type up this ordinance. And then I guess my other concern is I feel some of these issues can be addressed with other tools we have. And Mr. Moore, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. It mentions commercial parking spaces and blocking, it sounds like egress and ingress for cars, but wouldn't that be a building code violation? Or for example, if they were blocking too many commercial parking spots, through the president, if they were blocking too many commercial parking spots, would that not be a building code violation that we could take care of without this ordinance? And health code violations through the Board of Health and things like that.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. As far as health code violations, yes, that would be the health department would enforce those. You might zone out a particular kind of business because there have been a lot of violations. I'm not saying that has anything to do with this one, but there are zoning ordinances like this kind of business is a problem, and so we're going to decide we don't want those. That's not an appropriate use here. As far as the parking part, if you have in your, part of it's been taken out of the commercial side, the required number of parking spaces, but it's certainly a factor when approving plans. It's is there enough parking? Is the egress, is the way the parking lot is laid out, is a part of what's submitted to the building department, is what part of what's approved as plans. But that assumes that a certain chunk of the parking lot will not be permanently occupied by something, that would be how that factors in to this zoning code amendment. That's how, that's the logic behind that part of the whereas clauses. And I just want to say, the whereas clauses are there to explain why an ordinance is passed. They are not actually the operative terms of the ordinance. So the fact that it says it in the whereas clause has got nothing to do with what the actual rules are. It's just an explanation as to why.
Okay.
I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Mrs. Boland.
I just have a clarifying question. The wording of the ordinance states, and someone please correct me if I'm incorrect, that trucks would not be able to park on public or private property at any time without a single day permit. Correct?
I don't remember.
It's public property. So they can't park there.
Mr. Moore, do you want this one?
I'll be honest, the operative language of it came from the planning commission, and so that's what I incorporated into the ordinance, and I did not really study it, but it's, because the operative language was addressed by the assistant law director and the planning director when it went to the planning commission, so the actual, is this required or is that required? It's legal. That's my understanding is, you'd need to get a permit from the city in order to operate the food truck that day.
Okay. Yeah. So my main concern from this is just that we are doing a blanket statement that there is nowhere in the city of Norwood that you can park your food truck without a single day permit and 14 days notice. This says a minimum of 14 days prior to the scheduled public or private event. I just can't understand really in any way how that is supportive of small businesses. Whether that means that we need to have a designated area or something, this has to be amended before it gets any of my support personally. This feels like a ban to me. This language comes across as a ban on food trucks to me, which is not what I want to see for Norwood.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Franzen.
So I have probably, never mind, I'm sorry, I just answered my own question in my head. Very tired, my apologies.
Mrs. Hoover.
Thank you. With the bulk of us having multiple issues with this, I'm asking my colleagues, how do we want to pass it and keep having this conversation? Do we want to, when I say pass it, I mean have first reading, thank you. Or do we say this is so problematic that we need it to be, pardon me, that we need it to be fully rehashed? I mean, and maybe that's a question for Mrs. Winterbauer, who's done a lot of work on it, or Mr. Skelly, I'm not sure.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
I mean, at this point, if we want, we could send it to Economic Committee and continue the conversation there. Again, a lot of the things that we ran into is if the city doesn't want them in basically the parking lots in the central business district. I'd like legitimate reasons for that, but then, okay, then what's the plan?
Mm-hmm.
Where can the food trucks go? How can we support them? The ones that are currently there, this is how we are going to help them relocate or support them in a new place. I know the Montgomery Road plan was brought up in the whereas. They have a bunch of different options in there. I brought up when I was working on it, like pilot programs. Let's try something out. Let's do a pilot program at this location and see what the city can actually do, and then see what other inlets the city would need from volunteers or the food trucks or things like that. Again, I want to be supportive of the mobile food trucks. But that's where I basically left it, is there needs to be a lot more input on what would work and what doesn't. You look at all the different energy sources that different food trucks use, water usage, all of that. So really bringing all of that data to the table and figuring out the best way to support, small businesses, which if you look at cities all over, they typically scale up to brick and mortars. And so on an economic standpoint, that's important for me to support these businesses in hopes that, yes, you become a brick and mortar in Norwood. I don't know if that's feasible to send it to Economic Committee at this point. I don't know. But that would...
I was just going to say, if there was a motion if you want to withdraw your motion, and then Ms. Royce, the second to the motion, to having a first reading, and then someone wants to move to put the matter back into committee, we can do that as well. Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, as the chair of the Small Business Committee, I'm in full support of that idea. I think this requires much more conversation than we have the freedom to have in 3 readings. And I think personally, I would like to see some amendments made to this before we move forward with the readings.
Mrs. Franzen.
Thank you. I definitely agree. I was trying to find my cheat sheet for Robert's rules to try to figure out the best way to say, like, hey, we should refer this to committee. I did not make the motion, but I would be in full support of referring it to the committee instead of doing the first reading.
Mr. Garten.
There's been a lot of talk about how brick and mortars deserve more, or that they are superior in some way. I want to challenge that. Why do we believe that brick and mortars are better than mobile units? As a former business owner, I'll tell you this. Everything inside of brick and mortar makes you spend more money. And so every brick and mortar, those chairs cost money, napkins cost money, everything that they give you to the ambiance. I mean, look at Ford's Garage. Great burgers, but you're paying for the ambiance of the assembly line ahead of you. So what we're saying is we hope that we will charge residents more, because these business owners have found an efficient way to make money, and we hope that they will find a less efficient way to make money and charge our residents more. I just don't understand the logic behind hoping that these small business owners decide to have a different small business. Why should we tell them how to do their business?
Mrs. Hoover.
Thank you. I'd like to move the conversation forward and maybe invite Mrs. Winterbauer, if you would be willing to amend your motion.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes, I'll just make a quick statement. I don't think brick and mortars are better than food trucks, and I'm not forcing any food truck into a brick and mortar. Norwood has a ton of open real estate for businesses to go into. If they want to go into it, great. If not, so be it. But I just think there's opportunity there. But I would like to amend my motion to have the first reading to
move the matter into...
To move to the matter into the Economic and Small Business Committee.
Ms. Royce, would you amend your second?
I will amend my second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mrs. Franzen.
I just want to say again, thank you all for coming. And this is, as the mayor said earlier, this is really part of the process. I've been champing at the bit to talk about this all week, but I haven't talked about it to anyone because I want to do this in front of everyone, in public, on record. So I just want to thank everyone for being here, Mayor, everyone who has a stake in this. And I look forward to hearing about it in the Small Business Committee since I'm on that. So.
Any further discussion? Mr. Garten.
Sorry. Why don't we just vote our conscience tonight? I don't understand trying to spend a lot of time amending this when there's problems and more paragraphs than not in this thing. So if that's what council decides to do, that's fine, but I encourage council to vote their conscience tonight and just let's move.
Mrs. Franzen?
I totally see that perspective. I think my major thing would be this is probably going to keep coming up. So I think if we can maybe hash it out in committee, that's better than having it come up again from another planning committee, you know, having another public hearing here in 3 or 4 months if they have other ideas. That's just my feeling, is if the planning commission would decide, no, we still want to do this, we would have to do this again and maybe create more uncertainty. So from my perspective, I feel like it'd be better to talk about it in committee, and maybe in that committee we decide, no, let's start from scratch, or maybe we can salvage some parts of this. I don't know. That's just kind of my feeling.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer?
Norwood needs to have a plan for food trucks in our ordinances. We currently don't, so this is kind of why it came up. So I think this will be good to have a plan of this is what the city envisions for food trucks in our city.
Mrs. Bowling?
I would also imagine that food truck owners would like to have some sort of legal, I think this could also serve to protect them and ensure that there's not this ambiguity and this up to interpretation and up to individuals or, you know, who happens to be on administration right there, or whatever the impression may be. Not that I think that's what's going on, but I think having something legally set out in writing that everyone knows these are the guidelines is important. Other cities do have ordinances surrounding food trucks in order to take that ambiguity away. I think that's important to have something written to protect the food trucks and to make sure that, you know, there are guidelines around this. So I don't want us to have nothing on the books about food trucks. I just want to make sure that what we do have on the books is fair and equitable and that we get ample community input on it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? The motion on the floor is to amend the original motion to now move this matter into the Economic Development and Small Business Committee. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
No.
We have 5 members voting yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement for the purchase of 3 new police cruisers and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mr. Gerton. Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement for the purchase of 3 new police cruisers and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement for the purchase of 3 new police cruisers and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement for the purchase of 3 new police cruisers and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
I move we pass the motion, the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Mr. Gerton.
Just for what it's worth, I want to make sure that this was stated publicly. Mr. Powers states that the police 2024 capital budget has adequate funding appropriated for this purchase, or the purchase of up to 3 police vehicles. The emergency clause is needed because there is a 3-month lag in the purchase date to get these. So we have the money. This is not a debt. This is expenditure that we can get 3 new cruisers in as fast as possible.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
That is exactly what I was going to say.
All right. Mrs. Hoover.
Sorry, I just want to be a little obnoxious. If anyone has ever been on a ride-along with the police, I can guarantee you they need new vehicles. They are they're working with last year's stuff, and there's a whole lot of they need a whole lot of I've lost all my words. Infrastructure. The potholes have done a real job on our cruisers. So I'm very happy that they're going to have those.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, motion on the floor by Mrs. Hoover, second by Mrs. Franzen, is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving to the next item, ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to enter into a contract with Enterprise Fleet Management for the purchase of 3 Ford Ranger pickup trucks for use by the Norwood Public Works Department and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mr. Gerton.
A second?
Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Mrs. Bowling.
Just to clarify why we are moving to suspend the rules, these are on hold at the dealership. And so if we do not purchase them now, they may not be available. I don't know if anyone's tried to buy a truck in the last 4 years, but it turns out they are few and far between. And there is a need for these. The funding is available.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mr. Garten, is to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to enter into a contract with Enterprise Fleet Management for the purchase of 3 Ford Ranger pickup trucks for use by the Norwood Public Works Department and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to enter into a contract with Enterprise Fleet Management for the purchase of 3 Ford Ranger pickup trucks for use by the Norwood Public Works Department and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety Service to enter into a contract with Enterprise Fleet Management for the purchase of 3 Ford Ranger pickup trucks for use by the Norwood Public Works Department and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
Also very fun, very cool, very fancy in my opinion. The funds that we set aside for this were to purchase 2 vehicles, and we have somehow managed to secure 3 vehicles for that same amount of money. That's like a free car. I love that. Love that so much. Also, I'd like to move that we pass the ordinance.
Thank you. I was waiting for that part.
I was kidding there.
Mrs. Franzen.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is an ordinance amending Ordinance 16-2024, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to reconstruct Lincoln Avenue from Mills to Franklin Avenues, including utility work on water distribution system and storm sewer, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
An ordinance amending Ordinance 16-2024, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to reconstruct Lincoln Avenue from Mills to Franklin Avenues, including utility work on water distribution system and storm sewer, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance amending Ordinance 16-2024, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to reconstruct Lincoln Avenue from Mills to Franklin Avenues, including utility work on water distribution system and storm sewer, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance amending Ordinance 16-2024, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to reconstruct Lincoln Avenue from Mills to Franklin Avenues, including utility work on water distribution system and storm sewer, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I'm seeing the additional funds that are required. And my question is, I suppose, through you to maybe Mr. Powers, where that additional funding is coming from.
Mr. Powers?
So we do have the appropriations available to meet the needs. Some of it is in stormwater, some of it is in water, some of it is in the streets funds, the general fund and the O2 streets fund. So the money is available there, but the previous ordinance only authorized up to a certain level, and the bids came back in over that level. And so that's why we're here, to ask for that additional authority.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
Clarifying question, just want to make sure I understand. That money had already been appropriated up to a certain, we already had it earmarked, but we only asked for this much. So there's still that buffer left.
So there's this much money appropriated. The bids were authorized to go up to here. The bids came in here.
Thank you. Visuals were helpful.
Visuals are always helpful.
And I also would like to say, this is the Elm project. Like, this is the big deal. No, this is not?
This is Lincoln.
Oh, this is Lincoln. Oh, I'm sorry. I was getting excited.
It's still very stormwater related.
Still very stormwater related. Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Bowling.
This is really just a technicality question. Through the president to Mr. Moore, this would directly impact flooding that I receive at my home should I abstain from this vote.
Mr. Moore.
No.
Okay. Just wanted to cover all my bases.
Any further discussion? All right. Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is a resolution declaring June 2024 to be Pride Month in the city of Norwood. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
Can I second with a request that the first reading be in full?
Mrs. Bowling, would you like to amend your motion to include the first reading in its entirety?
I will happily amend my motion to include the first reading in its entirety.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover, you will.
Thank you, sir. I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Mrs. Bowling.
I just want to clarify the need for the suspension of rules is that we are 3 days away from June, and so we just wanted to put this out here in its entirety before we enter into the month of June.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance with the first reading in its entirety. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the first reading of the resolution in its entirety, followed by the second and third readings by caption only.
Resolution declaring June 2024 to be Pride Month in the city of Norwood. Whereas Norwood is home to a diverse and inclusive community, and whereas individuals who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and other identities that may be part of the community LGBTQIA include people from all faiths, races, national origins, socioeconomic statuses, education levels, and political beliefs. And whereas LGBTQIA people in the United States have made and continue to make vital contributions to the United States and to the world in every aspect, including in the fields of education, law, health, business, science, research, economic development, architecture, law enforcement, healthcare, fashion, sports, government, military, music, film, politics, technology, literature, and civil rights. And whereas on June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in Obergefell v. Hodges that same-sex couples have a constitutional right to marry, and acknowledged that no union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. And whereas LGBTQIA people in the United States have fought for equal treatment, dignity, and respect, and whereas the first openly gay elected official in Norwood, Councilwoman Sam Bowling, was elected by the people of Ward 1 to represent them on council, and whereas LGBTQIA people, particularly transgender people, are currently facing legal discrimination at the state and federal levels. And whereas LGBTQIA people in the United States have achieved significant milestones, ensuring that future generations of LGBTQIA people in the United States will enjoy a more equal and just society, now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, that Section 1, the City of Norwood declares June 2024 as Pride Month to provide an opportunity for our residents to learn about the discrimination and inequality that the LGBTQIA community has experienced and continues to experience, and to celebrate the contributions of the LGBTQIA community. Resolution declaring June 2024 to be Pride Month in the City of Norwood. Resolution declaring June 2024 to be Pride Month in the City of Norwood.
Thank you. Is there a... Mrs. Bowling?
I move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the resolution. Is there a second? Mrs. Franzen?
A second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the last resolution. This is a resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Metro Transit Infrastructure Fund program and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Is there a second? Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
A resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Metro Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. A resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Metro Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. A resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Norwood, Ohio, to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Metro Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I move we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the resolution. Is there a second? Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to administration reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you. I'll be brief. A couple things. Bridget Kelly, Norwood Lateral, what an honor. You know, really, I mean, you guys are going to do a resolution for it, but what an honor that her peer group, that, you know, two of the members that she was serving with are coming into our council chambers to talk to us about that. It's an honor. I mean, I knew Bridget pretty well as a person growing up right down the street from me, as a child growing up with my kids, and she was always so great for Norwood. She was a good council member. She was a great person. She was just and it's really an honor that I think is well deserved, not just for Bridget Kelly, but for the whole Kelly family and for the Tepe family involved in and all the good things that have happened through the years through their all of them being involved. I mean, she grew up in Norwood with these roots, and her work ethic and all the things that she brought to the table. So I'm glad when she talked about it's not going to be this little small sign. It needs to be a big sign. It needs to say her name, because we are very proud of her and proud of what she was able to accomplish in her life to that point. Let's see, the Memorial Day, Decoration Day, Memorial Day stuff went very well, and I know Bishop James talked a little bit about it, but it's great to see that. It's great to see all the people come out, and then I know the sort of the pomp and circumstance of it, and the bagpipes and the bugler and all those things is really neat to see in our park. Let's see, what was the third thing I had on here? Well, talking about the mobile food truck regulation, this is the process. I wish more people understood sort of the process of how the public dialogue is started and what comes in front of council members. And I wish people would realize a little more of that when they go in front of this body, you're going in front of a group of community members that were elected, and they're reasonable people. I don't think any of you have came to me or said anything while you've been on council where you've been unreasonable or unwilling to listen. And I wish people would recognize that from the get-go, that when they come in here, it's not us against them. It's not a fight. It's a discussion. And that's how it should work. And they should feel free to enter and talk into that mic and tell us their opinions. And yes, I understand they're going to be nervous, but this is a reasonable council. There's nothing that's been done by this council that has been just jam it down anybody's throat. You listen to people, and that's an important part. And I hope that our community members will listen to that and recognize when you go in front of this board or you go in front of city council that you've got a reasonable group of individuals that will listen to you, take what you're saying into really consideration, and move forward in a productive manner. And I think that's an important part of it. So let's see, the last thing I'll talk about, and I'm probably missing a couple of different things, but the Elm Avenue project that we talked about and the funding, the big funding that we are getting from the county commission will be discussed at the commissioner board meeting on June 6th. And hopefully that'll be their final approval, and the process will then continue to move forward. We had a meeting at the community center. We had a meeting within the community, set up a tent and talked to a bunch of different people. And I mean, believe it or not every person in that community is just right, dead set, let's move forward. There are a couple of people in that community that still are going to have to be persuaded, and we're going to have to work this project. But it is a good project for the community and for that area, and we're going to continue to move forward. So we're making progress. We have until October to get this done, so it's a short time frame. And I think there were boards that were put up in the hall, in the atrium in the hallway today at City Hall. They're down there at this point, so people can stop by City Hall. Normal hours for City Hall to be open is 8 o'clock in the morning, and they close at 5. But you can get in here to look at what is sort of planned for that Elm Avenue. They're on some boards down there that gives you a good understanding of it. So that's all. Maybe that's not that brief, but sorry.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Schneider? All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Miracle.
I don't have anything to share this evening, Mr. President. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Moore. All right. Moving on to unfinished business. Mrs. Bowling.
We're going to switch it up. I'm going to go first tonight. I just want to give everyone a reminder about the Norwood Pride Market, which will be on Saturday, June 1st from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., not 3 p.m. You can hang out till 3. We're not going to kick you out. We will begin that at 9:30 next door to City Hall here with a pride flag raising and a reading of the resolution, which will be very exciting. There will be entertainment. We've booked a variety of entertainment, which will be really fun. Some vendors, some organizations with information. We have a food truck booked, and we will have a really lovely time. So I hope everybody will come out and support it. This is an all ages event. There will be tons of stuff to keep people busy.
Thank you.
And the weather's supposed to be gorgeous. Thank you, Mrs. Hoover. If there are any businesses in Norwood that would like to borrow a pride flag from the D&I board, they have a bunch of flags at hand, so just send Mrs. Hoover an email and we will get a flag dropped off to you for the month of June.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Mrs. Franzen?
Yeah, in addition to the Pride Market, which I'm really looking forward to, from 11 to 12:30 on Saturday at the Norwood Police and Fire Department, just across the street. Norwood Ready Kids will be there with information for people who have kids under the age of 5. This is a way that you can get resources for your kids that are preschool. That's from 11 to 12:30. There's a box lunch provided, and the firefighters and police will have a tour for preschool-aged children. So you can go to the Pride Market and then walk right down and do that afterward. Kind of convenient. Cyrus will not appreciate the tour. He is too small.
Any other new business? All right. Moving on to communications. We have one letter from Mr. Miracle.
Honorable Joe S. Gears and the Honorable City Council, pursuant to the recommendation of the Auditor of State and the report on accounting methods each month, upon completion of the financial report, copies of the reports will be sent via email to all department heads and elected officials for their review. Each month, the receipt of such reports shall be recorded in the minutes of City Council. The following reports will be provided: audit trail by account, bank report, encumbrance report, expense audit trail, expense report for current year, expense report with encumbrance detail, revenue audit trail, revenue report, and statement of cash. Respectfully, Ken Miracle, Auditor.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to receive and file?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to receive and file the letter. Is there a second? Mr. Garden.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Garden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We do have one absent member. Mrs. Franzen.
I'll make a motion to excuse the absent member.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to excuse the absent member. Is there a second? Mr. Garden?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Garden. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I'm curious if Councilmember Braden alerted you to his absence.
He did. He sent me a text that he would not be able to make the meeting this evening.
Thank you.
Yes. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
No.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
With 5 yes and 1 no, the motion carries. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Garden.
Make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.